The creek rushed with an unexpected fury that April morning in 1878, catching Daisy Ellsworth off guard as she knelt to collect water for her morning wash. The sudden surge knocked her sideways, sending her sprawling into the cold, rapid flow, but it wasn't her sodden skirts or bruised palms that brought tears to her eyes. It was the sickening realization that her silver locket, the only image she had of her parents, had been torn from her neck and swept away by the merciless current. Nogales, Arizona territory, was still finding its footing in those days. Nestled near the Mexican border, the settlement attracted all sorts, from merchants to ranchers to those simply passing through on their way to somewhere else. Daisy had been there for nearly 8 months, working as the town's schoolteacher after arriving from Boston with nothing but her education, determination, and the precious locket that had been her mother's final gift. At 23, Daisy had already weathered more heartache than some faced in a lifetime. Orphaned at 18 when influenza took both her parents within days of each other, she'd made the decision to head west, drawn by the promise of independence and purpose. The teaching position in Nogales had seemed like Providence, a chance to build something of her own. But now, as she stumbled out of the creek, her cotton dress clinging to her like a second skin, her heart felt as empty as her throat where the locket had rested for the past 5 years. She stood helplessly on the bank, watching the rushing water carry away her most precious possession. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice startled her. Turning, she found herself face to face with a tall man on horseback. He sat atop a chestnut mare, his hat pulled low, shadowing eyes that studied her with evident concern. "I'm," Daisy began, but her voice caught as a sob threatened to escape. "I fell in the creek." "I can see that," he said, dismounting in one fluid motion. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 29, with a face weathered by sun and wind, but kind around the eyes. "Are you hurt?" "No, not hurt," Daisy said, trying to gather her composure despite her dripping clothes and disheveled hair. "But my locket, it was torn from my neck. It's gone downstream." The man glanced at the rushing creek, then back at her. "A locket, you say? What did it look like?" "Silver, oval-shaped, with a small flower etched on the front," Daisy explained, her voice trembling. "It has a photograph inside my parents. It's all I have left of them." Something in the man's expression shifted. He nodded once, decisively. "I'm Kieran Tanner," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Most folks just call me Kit, and I'm going to help you find that locket." Daisy stared at him, momentarily speechless. "That's very kind, Mr. Tanner, but the current is strong but not impossible," he interrupted. "Creek's swollen from the spring melt, but it narrows about half a mile downstream. Things tend to catch there." He removed his leather vest and handed it to her. "Take this. Morning's still cool and you're soaked through." Daisy hesitated only a moment before accepting the vest, wrapping it around her shoulders. It carried the scent of tobacco and leather, warm and oddly comforting. "Thank you, but I can't ask you to. You didn't ask, miss." "Ellsworth, Daisy Ellsworth. I'm the school teacher." Recognition dawned in his eyes. "The new schoolmarm from back east. Heard about you. My brother's boy, Tommy, says you're teaching him to read proper." Daisy felt a flicker of pride cut through her distress. "Tommy is a bright student, very determined. Runs in the family," Kit said with a slight smile. He turned back to his horse, adjusting the saddle. "You head back to town and get dried off. I'll ride downstream and see what I can find." "Mr. Tanner, I appreciate the gesture, but I can't let you waste your day on such a slim chance." "Not a waste if it matters to you," he said simply. Then, after a brief pause, "And it's Kit. Mr. Tanner was my father." Before Daisy could protest further, Kit had mounted his horse again. "The Nogales Hotel, isn't it? "Where you're boarding," she nodded. "I'll come by when I've finished looking, whether I find it or not." With that, he tipped his hat and guided his horse toward a path that ran alongside the creek. Daisy watched him go, the stranger who'd stopped to help without hesitation. Only as he disappeared around a bend did she realize she was still wearing his vest. The walk back to town gave Daisy time to collect herself, though her damp clothes drew concerned looks from the few townsfolk already about their morning business. Mrs. Harmon, who ran the hotel where Daisy boarded, clucked sympathetically when she saw her bedraggled state and immediately insisted on drawing a hot bath. "Land's sakes, child, you look like you've been dragged through the creek backward," the older woman exclaimed, helping Daisy out of her wet clothes. "What happened?" As Daisy explained about her fall and the lost locket, Mrs. Harmon's weathered face softened with understanding. "That's a terrible shame, dear. Family keepsakes are irreplaceable. A man stopped to help Kit Tanner. He said he'd look for it downstream." Mrs. Harmon's eyebrows rose slightly. "Kit Tanner, you say? Well, if anyone can find your locket, it'd be him. Man tracks like he's part Apache from what they say." "You know him, then?" "Not well, but everyone knows of the Tanner brothers. They run cattle on a spread about 5 miles outside town. Good men, from all accounts, if a bit rough around the edges. Kit's the younger one, keeps to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings." This information occupied Daisy's thoughts as she soaked in the bath, trying to ease the chill from her bones. She wasn't naive enough to pin her hopes on Kit finding her locket, but there was something reassuring about his confidence, the matter-of-fact way he'd promised to try. After changing into dry clothes and pinning her damp hair up neatly, Daisy tried to distract herself with lesson plans for the coming week. The tiny schoolhouse on the edge of town currently had 18 pupils ranging from 6 to 15 years of age. Teaching children of such varied ages and abilities was challenging, but Daisy found satisfaction in the work. It gave her purpose, something she desperately needed after her parents' deaths. The hours crept by with no word from Kit Tanner. By mid-afternoon, Daisy had resigned herself to the loss of her locket. She just finished her simple supper in the hotel dining room when Mrs. Harmon appeared at her table. "There's someone asking for you at the front desk, Miss Ellsworth. A Mr. Tanner." Daisy's heart leapt as she hurriedly folded her napkin and stood. In the lobby, Kit Tanner stood with his hat in his hands, his clothes mud-splattered and his boots caked with dried clay. He looked exhausted, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his expression that made her breath catch. "Mr. Tanner, Kit, did you find it?" she asked, scarcely daring to hope. In answer, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something that glinted in the lamplight. Her silver locket, tarnished and muddy but intact, dangling from its broken chain. Daisy's hand flew to her mouth. "You found it," she whispered, reaching for the precious object with trembling fingers. "Caught on some branches about 2 miles downstream," Kit explained. "Chain's broken, but the locket itself seems sound." She carefully opened the clasp, and there they were, her parents' faces smiling up at her from the small photograph inside. The relief that washed over her was so intense it made her knees weak. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you for this kindness." Kit shook his head. "No need for repayment, Miss Ellsworth. I'm glad I could help." "At least let me buy you supper," she insisted. "You must be starving after spending all day searching." A hint of a smile crossed his face. "I wouldn't say no to a hot meal." As they settled at a corner table in the hotel's dining room, Daisy couldn't help noticing how out of place Kit seemed in the prim setting, with his broad shoulders and sun-browned skin. Yet there was an inherent dignity in his bearing that transcended his rough exterior. "Have you lived in Nogales long?" Daisy asked as Mrs. Harmon brought them coffee. since '72. My brother James and I came out from Texas after the war. He'd fought for the Union. I was too young to enlist. Kit took a sip of his coffee. We wanted land of our own, away from the trouble back east. Territory was still plenty wild then. And now you have a ranch, Kit nodded. The Double T, nothing fancy but it's ours, free and clear. Runs about 800 head of cattle in good years. That sounds substantial to me, Daisy observed, impressed. You and your brother must work very hard. It's a living, Kit said with a modest shrug. James handles most of the business side now. He married a widow lady from town 3 years back, Laura. They have Tommy, her boy from her first marriage, and a little girl of their own now, Abigail. Daisy smiled, remembering the quiet, serious boy in her class. Tommy's a fine young man. You must be proud of him. He thinks the world of you, Miss Ellsworth. Says you don't talk down to the children like the last teacher did. Warmth spread through her at the compliment. Please, call me Daisy. After retrieving my most precious possession, I think we've moved beyond formalities. Their conversation flowed easily through the meal, despite their different backgrounds. Kit spoke sparingly but thoughtfully about his life in the West, while Daisy shared stories of Boston and her journey to Arizona. She found herself drawn to his straightforward manner and the intelligence that glinted in his gray-green eyes. When he finally rose to leave, Daisy walked him to the hotel entrance. I still don't know how to thank you properly, she said, clutching the locket in her hand. Seeing you smile is thanks enough, Kit replied, then looked slightly embarrassed at his own words. He cleared his throat. Sunday's the spring social at the church. Perhaps. If you're attending, we might share a dance. Daisy felt a flutter of unexpected pleasure at the invitation. I'd like that very much. Kit nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face as he placed his hat back on his head. Good night then, Daisy Ellsworth. I'll see you Sunday. As she watched him walk away, Daisy realized she was still smiling. Opening her palm, she gazed down at the tarnished locket that had somehow led this unexpected man into her life. For the first time since arriving in Nogales, she felt a sense of genuine connection to this place, to its people, and especially to the quiet cowboy who'd spent an entire day searching a creek just to return her most treasured possession. The following morning, Daisy took the locket to Mr. Winters, the town's watchmaker, who also handled small jewelry repairs. The elderly man examined the broken chain with a jeweler's loop screwed into his eye. Chain's beyond saving, Miss Ellsworth, but I can fit a new one easy enough, he pronounced. Be ready by Friday afternoon if that suits. That would be perfect, thank you, Daisy replied, already thinking about wearing it to the social on Sunday. Throughout the school day, her thoughts kept drifting to Kit Tanner. There was something compelling about his quiet strength and the kindness he'd shown her, a stranger in need. It had been a long time since Daisy had allowed herself to think of any man in such a way. After her parents' deaths, survival and independence had been her only concerns. Tommy Tanner was particularly attentive in class that day, raising his hand to answer questions more than usual. As the children filed out at the end of the day, he lingered behind. Uncle Kit said he found your special necklace, Miss Ellsworth, the 10-year-old said. Daisy smiled warmly at the boy. He did indeed, Tommy. Your uncle was very kind and persistent. Tommy nodded solemnly. Uncle Kit's good at finding things. Pa says he's got the eyes of an eagle. The boy hesitated, then added with the guilelessness of childhood, he said you were pretty too. Heat rose in Daisy's cheeks. Did he now? Yes'm. I heard him telling Pa this morning when they were checking the fence line. With that bombshell delivered, Tommy gave her a gap-toothed grin and dashed out the door, leaving Daisy speechless. Friday arrived with clear skies and the promise of a beautiful weekend ahead. After school, Daisy hurried to Mr. Winter's shop to collect her locket. The watchmaker had done a fine job. The silver gleamed, polished to a high shine, and the new chain was even sturdier than the original. "It's beautiful," Daisy breathed, admiring the restored piece. "How much do I owe you, Mr. Winters?" The old man waved away her question. "Already taken care of, Miss Ellsworth." "I don't understand. By whom?" "Mr. Tanner came by yesterday, insisted on paying for the repairs himself." Mr. Winters gave her a knowing look, said it was important the job be done right. Daisy didn't know whether to be touched or exasperated by Kit's gesture. She'd wanted to thank him properly, not be further indebted to him. Still, the thoughtfulness of the act wasn't lost on her. As she left the shop, Locket once again safely around her neck, Daisy nearly collided with a woman carrying a basket of fresh produce. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," Daisy exclaimed, steadying the basket before it could spill. "No harm done," the woman replied with a friendly smile. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with warm brown eyes and practical clothes that somehow managed to look stylish. "You must be Miss Ellsworth, the teacher. I'm Laura Tanner, Tommy's mother." "Of course. It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Tanner. Tommy is a wonderful student." Laura beamed with maternal pride. "Thank you for saying so. He talks about your lessons constantly." She adjusted her basket, then added casually, "I understand you've met my brother-in-law, Kit." "Yes, he was kind enough to help me when I lost my locket in the creek," Daisy confirmed, touching the silver oval at her throat. "In fact, he even arranged to have it repaired." Laura's eyes twinkled. "That sounds like Kit." "He's always been the thoughtful one, though he'd deny it if you said so to his face." She glanced at the position of the sun. "I was just about to stop for some tea at the cafe. Would you care to join me?" Daisy hadn't planned on lingering in town, but the opportunity to learn more about Kit through his family was too tempting to pass up. "I'd be delighted." The women settled at a small table in Mrs. Potter's tea room, where Laura ordered a pot of tea and some freshly baked scones for them both. "So, Boston to Nogales is quite a journey for a young woman alone," Laura observed once they were served. "What brought you all the way out here, if you don't mind my asking?" Daisy stirred her tea thoughtfully. "After my parents passed, there wasn't much keeping me in Boston. I'd trained as a teacher, and when I saw the advertisement for a position out here, it seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start." Laura nodded understandingly. "Many of us came west for similar reasons. I was widowed young with Tommy just a toddler. Came to Nogales to live with my brother and found James Tanner instead." Her expression softened. "Sometimes the hardest journeys lead us exactly where we need to be." "Your family seems wonderful," Daisy said sincerely. "Tommy speaks so highly of his father and uncle." "They're good men," Laura agreed. "Different as night and day in some ways. James is all business and planning, while Kit—" She smiled affectionately. "Kit feels things deeply, though he doesn't always show it. He's more comfortable with horses and wide open spaces than with people, generally speaking. Yet he spent an entire day searching a creek for a stranger's locket," Daisy mused. Laura gave her a shrewd look. "Perhaps he didn't see you as a stranger." After a moment, she added, "Will you be at the social on Sunday?" "Yes, I'm looking forward to it." "Good. We'll see you there then. The whole family comes in for the socials, even Kit, though he usually needs some convincing." Laura finished her tea and gathered her basket. "I should get back to the ranch. Little Abigail will be waking from her nap, and she gets cross if I'm not there." As they parted ways outside the tea room, Laura touched Daisy's arm gently. "I'm glad Kit found your locket, Miss Ellsworth. Some things are too precious to lose." The warmth in the other woman's eyes suggested she wasn't only talking about the silver pendant. Sunday dawned bright and clear. perfect weather for the spring social. Daisy took extra care with her appearance, selecting her best dress, a cornflower blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and arranging her honey blonde hair in a becoming style. The locket lay against her throat, a comfortable weight that now carried new associations beyond memories of her parents. The church grounds were festive with ribbons and bunting when Daisy arrived. Tables laden with food lined one side of the yard, while a small group of musicians tuned their instruments under a canvas awning. Nearly everyone in Nogales had turned out, dressed in their Sunday best and eager for the rare opportunity to socialize. Daisy was immediately swept into conversations with parents of her students and other townsfolk who wanted to meet the teacher who had made such a positive impression on their children. She was introducing herself to the minister's wife when she felt a presence behind her and turned to find Kit Tanner watching her, a tentative smile on his face. The transformation from the mud-splattered cowboy of a few days ago was striking. Though still plainly dressed compared to some of the town men, Kit cut an impressive figure in his clean dark trousers, white shirt, and polished boots. He'd trimmed his beard and combed his dark hair neatly, though it still curled slightly at the collar. "Miss Ellsworth," he greeted her, removing his hat. "You look beautiful today." "Thank you, Kit," she replied, pleased by his straightforwardness. "And thank you again for having my locket repaired. You shouldn't have gone to the expense." He shook his head dismissively. "It was nothing. I'm just glad to see you wearing it again." Before Daisy could respond, Tommy Tanner darted between them, practically vibrating with excitement. "Uncle Kit, Miss Ellsworth, Pa says the dancing's about to start. Are you gonna dance together?" Kit shot his nephew an exasperated look, but Daisy laughed. "I believe your uncle did promise me a dance, Tommy." "Indeed I did," Kit confirmed, offering Daisy his arm with unexpected grace. "If you're still willing." "I've been looking forward to it," she admitted as he led her toward the area cleared for dancing. The musicians struck up a lively reel, and Daisy soon discovered that Kit moved with surprising agility for such a powerfully built man. His hand at her waist was respectful but steady as he guided her through the turns of the dance. "You dance very well for a cowboy," Daisy remarked, slightly breathless from the pace. A smile tugged at Kit's mouth. "My mother insisted all her sons learn properly. Said no Tanner boy would embarrass her by stumbling around a dance floor like a newborn calf." The image made Daisy laugh. "She sounds like a formidable woman." "She was," Kit agreed, a shadow crossing his face briefly. "She passed during a fever outbreak when I was 15. Pa followed 3 years later." "I'm sorry," Daisy said softly. "It's never easy losing parents." Kit's eyes met hers with understanding. "No, it isn't, but we carry them with us, don't we? In memories, in lockets." The simple truth of his words touched her deeply. As the music slowed into a waltz, Kit drew her slightly closer, his movements becoming more deliberate. Daisy was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, the clean scent of soap and leather that surrounded him, the respectful way he maintained proper distance between them even as the dance brought them into closer proximity. "My sister-in-law tells me you're quite the hit with the schoolchildren," Kit said. "Says even the Jackson boys are behaving, which their mother claims is nothing short of miraculous." Daisy smiled, pleased by the compliment. "They're good children, all of them. Sometimes they just need someone to believe they can be better than they think they are." Kit looked at her thoughtfully. "That's a gift, seeing the best in people." "I could say the same about a man who spends an entire day searching a creek for a stranger's keepsake," Daisy countered. His expression softened. "Maybe I just wanted an excuse to see you again." The simple admission sent warmth spreading through Daisy's chest. Before she could respond, the music ended, and they found themselves standing still amid the swirl of other dancers, something unspoken hanging in the air between them. The moment was broken by James Tanner approaching with his wife. The family resemblance between the brothers was evident, though James was slightly shorter and his face more openly expressive. "So this is the famous Miss Ellsworth," James said with a friendly smile. "Tommy hasn't stopped talking about you since you found that locket for her, Kit." "Other way around, James," Kit corrected mildly. "I found the locket for Miss Ellsworth." "Daisy, please," she reminded them. "Daisy," Laura echoed warmly. "I'm so glad you could join us today. Are you enjoying the social very much?" Daisy assured her, stealing a glance at Kit. "We were hoping you might join us for Sunday dinner next week," Laura continued. "Nothing formal, just family. Tommy would be thrilled and it would give you a chance to see the ranch." Daisy was touched by the invitation. "I'd be honored, thank you." "Excellent." James clapped his brother on the shoulder. "Kit can collect you after church." "Right, brother." Kit gave a slight nod, but Daisy caught the pleased look in his eyes. "I'd be happy to." As the afternoon progressed, Daisy found herself drawn back to Kit repeatedly. They shared another dance, sampled the various dishes brought by the townspeople, and eventually wandered to a quieter spot beneath an old cottonwood tree at the edge of the church grounds. "I wanted to ask," Kit said, his voice low and serious, "if you'd allow me to call on you properly. I know we've only just met, but I've never—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I'd like to know you better, Daisy Ellsworth." Daisy felt a flutter of anticipation in her stomach. "I'd like that too, Kit, very much." His smile, then, was worth every mile of the long journey from Boston to this dusty border town. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the churchyard, Daisy realized she felt more at home in Nogales at that moment than she had since arriving 8 months earlier. The week that followed seemed to crawl by for Daisy. She threw herself into her teaching with renewed vigor, but her thoughts frequently drifted to Kit Tanner and their upcoming dinner at the ranch. On Wednesday afternoon, she was surprised to find him waiting outside the schoolhouse as the children were dismissed. Tommy spotted his uncle first and raced over to him with a whoop of delight. "Uncle Kit, did you bring Domino?" "He's tied up around back," Kit confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. "Your pa sent me to town for supplies and said I should collect you on the way home." Tommy's face lit up. "Can I ride him all the way back to the ranch, please?" "If you promise to be careful and not tire him out," Kit agreed, then looked up to find Daisy watching them from the schoolhouse steps. The smile that spread across his face sent a warm shiver through her. "Miss Ellsworth," he greeted her, touching the brim of his hat. "Hope you don't mind me stealing one of your students a bit early." "Not at all," Daisy replied, descending the steps. "Tommy finished all his lessons admirably today." The boy beamed at the praise. "Can I go get on Domino now, Uncle Kit?" "Go on," Kit nodded, and Tommy took off running toward the back of the schoolhouse. Once the boy was out of earshot, Kit turned back to Daisy. "I confess I had another reason for coming to town today." "Oh," Daisy tried to keep her voice casual. "Wanted to make sure you were still planning to come to dinner on Sunday," he said, shifting his weight slightly in a rare display of uncertainty. "And to ask if you might like to ride out to the ranch with me beforehand. There's a spot I thought you might enjoy seeing if the weather holds." The prospect of spending more time with Kit sent a pleasant thrill through her. "That sounds lovely. What time should I be ready? Is 9 too early? It's about an hour's ride to the place I want to show you, and then another half-hour to the ranch from there." 9 is perfect," Daisy assured him. "Should I bring anything for dinner?" Kit smiled. "Just yourself. Laura's been cooking up a storm since James told her you were coming. I think she's missed having another woman to talk to out at the ranch." Tommy's excited shout drew their attention. The boy was already astride a handsome black and white pinto, holding the reins confidently for a child his age. "I should get him home before he wears out my horse with excitement," Kit said with a chuckle. "I'll see you Sunday, Daisy." "I'll be ready," she promised, watching as he swung up behind Tommy on the pinto's back. The boy's delight at sharing the saddle with his uncle was evident in his posture and animated chatter as they rode away. When Sunday morning arrived, Daisy was ready well before 9, her anticipation making sleep difficult. She'd chosen a practical riding skirt and jacket for the outing, with her hair braided and pinned securely for the journey. Mrs. Harmon had packed them a small basket of food for their excursion, insisting that a proper picnic needs proper provisions. Kit arrived precisely at 9, leading 2 horses, his pinto and a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "This is Penny," he explained as he helped Daisy mount. "She belongs to Laura, but she's happy to loan her to you for the day. She's steady and sure-footed, good for riders who aren't used to Western trails." "She's beautiful," Daisy said, stroking the mare's neck. "Please thank Laura for her generosity." As they rode out of town, Daisy was struck by how different the landscape looked from horseback, compared to the occasional wagon rides she'd taken with other townsfolk. The desert spread out before them, not barren as she'd first thought upon arriving in Arizona, but alive with subtle colors and textures, sage greens, sandy golds, and the occasional splash of wildflowers taking advantage of the spring moisture. Kit proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out plants and wildlife, explaining which were useful and which to avoid. He seemed more relaxed away from town, his sentences growing longer, his smiles coming more readily. When they crested a ridge after about an hour's ride, he drew his horse to a stop. "This is what I wanted to show you," he said softly. Below them stretched a hidden valley, verdant with spring growth and bisected by a clear stream that pooled into a small, natural basin surrounded by cottonwoods. Wildflowers dotted the grass in splashes of blue, yellow, and purple. "It's breathtaking," Daisy whispered, genuinely awed by the unexpected oasis. "Local Apache call it the place where spirits rest," Kit explained as they dismounted and led the horses down a narrow trail into the valley. "James and I found it our first year here. It's on Tanner land, but we've never grazed cattle here. Seemed like a place that should be left as it is." They settled beneath a sprawling cottonwood near the pool, spreading a blanket Mrs. Harmon had included in the basket. As Kit unsaddled the horses to let them graze and drink, Daisy arranged their simple meal of bread, cheese, preserves, and cold chicken. "How did you learn so much about this land?" she asked as they ate. "About the plants and the Apache names for places." Kit looked thoughtful. "After the war, there was a lot of trouble between settlers and the Apache. Most folks saw them only as enemies to be feared or fought, but an old trapper who'd been in these parts for decades told me something I never forgot." He paused, remembering. He said, "Boy, you can't truly own land you don't understand, and you can't understand land without knowing the people who knew it first." "That's quite profound," Daisy observed. "Changed how I saw things," Kit admitted. "I started trading with some of the peaceful bands when I could, learning what they were willing to teach. The knowledge has served us well at the ranch." Daisy studied him with new appreciation. "You're not what most people would expect from a frontier cattleman, Kit Tanner." A slight flush colored his tanned cheeks. "Don't know about that. I'm just a man trying to make his way as best he can." He gestured to her locket. "May I ask who they were? Your parents?" Daisy's hand went automatically to the silver pendant. She opened it carefully, revealing the small photograph inside a handsome couple in their 40s, the woman bearing Daisy's delicate features, the man with a scholarly air about him. My father was a professor of literature at a small college in Boston, she explained. My mother taught piano to supplement his income. They married late in life and had only me. Her voice softened with memory. They were kind, thoughtful people who believed education was the greatest gift one could give or receive. They'd be proud of you, Kit said quietly. Carrying their values all the way out here, teaching children who might otherwise never learn to read properly. The simple sincerity of his words touched her deeply. Thank you for saying that. It's only the truth, he replied, then smiled slightly. My mother would have liked you. She had no patience for pretense either. They spent hours in the peaceful valley, talking more freely than they had before. Kit told her about growing up in Texas, about following his older brother west after the war had changed everything, about the hard years building the ranch from nothing. Daisy shared stories of her childhood in Boston, her dreams of becoming a writer someday alongside her teaching, and the grief that had propelled her westward. When it was time to leave for the ranch, Daisy felt as though she'd known Kit far longer than the handful of days since he'd rescued her locket. There was an ease between them now, a comfortable understanding that made the ride to the Double T Ranch pass quickly. The ranch house came into view as they crested a low hill, a substantial log structure with a wide porch, smoke curling from the stone chimney. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and a corral held half a dozen horses. The setting sun cast everything in a golden glow that made the modest homestead look like something from a painting. It's lovely, Daisy said sincerely. It's home, Kit replied with quiet pride. Tommy spotted them first, racing from the barn with unrestrained enthusiasm. Uncle Kit. Miss Ellsworth. Ma said if you didn't get here soon, the roast was going to turn to leather, Kit laughed, swinging down from his horse and then helping Daisy dismount. Tell your ma we're here, and the roast is safe from overcooking. The boy darted back toward the house, shouting the news of their arrival. Laura appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on an apron and smiling broadly. Welcome to the Double T, Daisy, she called. I hope Kit didn't get you lost out there. Not at all, Daisy assured her as they approached. He showed me the most beautiful valley I've ever seen. Laura's eyebrows rose slightly as she glanced at her brother-in-law. The hidden valley. You must have made quite an impression, Daisy. Kit rarely takes anyone there. Kit cleared his throat, looking slightly embarrassed. Thought she'd appreciate it is all. Indeed, Laura said with a knowing smile. Well, come inside before James and Tommy devour everything. They've been circling the table like wolves for the past half hour. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, with sturdy, well-made furniture and touches of refinement that Daisy suspected were Laura's influence. James greeted her warmly. Little Abigail stared at her with wide, curious eyes from her father's arms, and Tommy proudly showed her the special place set for her at the table. Dinner was a lively affair, with good food and better company. The Tanner family dynamic was affectionate and teasing, with none of the stiff formality Daisy had grown up with in Boston society. By the time they finished Laura's apple pie for dessert, Daisy felt thoroughly welcomed. After the meal, while Laura put Abigail to bed and James helped Tommy with a school project, Kit suggested a short walk to work off some of the generous dinner. They strolled toward a small rise behind the house, where a single oak tree stood sentinel against the darkening sky. Thank you for today, Daisy said as they paused beneath the tree. For sharing your special place and for including me in your family's Sunday dinner. Kit looked down at her, his expression serious in the fading light. I've lived in Nogales for 6 years now, built something good with James. But I never felt like I was missing anything until I saw you standing by that creek, soaking wet and heartbroken over your locket. The quiet admission stole Daisy's breath. "Kit, I'm not a man of fancy words, Daisy, but I think maybe finding your locket was just an excuse for fate to introduce us properly." He took her hand gently in his. "I'd like to keep seeing you if you're willing, to see where this might lead." Daisy felt a sureness settle over her, calm and clear as the evening sky above them. "I'd like that very much." His smile then was everything relief and joy and tender possibility all at once. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Kit leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it made her heart ache. When they parted, the look in his eyes told her more clearly than words that something profound had begun between them. The ride back to town that evening was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts yet more connected than before. At the hotel entrance, Kit helped her dismount and held her hand a moment longer than necessary. "I'll call on you Tuesday evening if that's agreeable," he said. "I'll look forward to it," Daisy replied, touching the locket at her throat, the small silver object that had somehow changed the course of her life in a way she never could have imagined, when it slipped from her neck into the rushing creek. Over the following weeks, Daisy and Kit fell into a comfortable pattern. He would ride into town on Tuesday and Thursday evenings to take her for walks or to share simple meals at the hotel dining room. Sundays became sacred church in the morning, followed by dinner at the Double T Ranch, where Daisy was increasingly treated as part of the family. Laura, in particular, seemed delighted by the developing relationship, often finding reasons to leave the pair alone together. As May turned to June and the Arizona heat intensified, Daisy discovered new aspects of Kit's character. He was unfailingly considerate, always thinking ahead to her comfort without making her feel helpless or incapable. He listened when she spoke of her dreams and ambitions, never dismissing them as fanciful or inappropriate for a woman. And most surprisingly for a man who had made his way in the rough frontier, he had a deep appreciation for poetry, often carrying a worn volume of Wordsworth or Whitman in his saddlebag. "My mother insisted we have culture, even in Texas," he explained one evening as they sat on the hotel's small veranda. "Said just because we lived among cattle didn't mean we had to think like them." Daisy laughed, charmed by the image of a young Kit being made to read poetry. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Kit agreed with a fond smile. "She'd have adored you, Daisy, almost as much as I do." The words hung in the warm evening air between them. They had not yet spoken of love directly, though Daisy had felt it growing with each passing day. "Kit," she began, her heart suddenly racing. "I miss Ellsworth." The urgent call interrupted whatever Daisy had been about to confess. They both turned to see Mrs. Potter, the butcher's wife, hurrying toward them with a worried expression. "Oh, thank goodness I found you," the older woman exclaimed. "It's little Mary Collins. She's taken very ill, and Dr. Faraday is away in Tucson. Her mother's beside herself, and Mary keeps asking for her teacher." Daisy was on her feet immediately. "Of course I'll come. Where is she?" "At home, the Collins place on Cedar Street." Kit stood as well, his hand steady at Daisy's elbow. "I'll come with you." They hurried through the quiet streets to a small house on the edge of town, where 8-year-old Mary Collins lay feverish and frightened in her bed. The child's mother, a young widow who worked as a laundress, looked nearly as ill with worry. "She started burning up this afternoon," Mrs. Collins explained tearfully. "I've tried cool cloths, but the fever won't break." Daisy sat on the edge of the bed, taking the little girl's hot hand in hers. "Hello, Mary, I hear you're not feeling well." "Miss Ellsworth," the child whispered, her usually bright eyes dull with fever. "Will you tell me a story? Like at school?" "Of course, sweetheart," Daisy soothed, brushing damp hair from the girl's forehead, to Mrs. "Collins," she said quietly, "have you tried willow bark tea? It can help with fever." The woman shook her head helplessly. "I wouldn't know where to find it or how to prepare it." "I do," Kit spoke up from the doorway. "If you have a horse I can borrow, Mrs. Collins, I can gather some and be back within the hour." "Take mine," the woman said gratefully. "He's in the small shed out back." As Kit departed, Daisy settled in to care for Mary, telling gentle stories and applying fresh, cool cloths to the child's burning skin. Mrs. Collins hovered anxiously nearby, clearly exhausted from worry. "Why don't you rest a bit, Mrs. Collins?" Daisy suggested kindly. "I'll watch over Mary until Mr. Tanner returns with the willow bark." The woman hesitated, then nodded gratefully. "Just for a few minutes. Call me if anything changes." When Kit returned, Daisy was still sitting beside Mary, speaking softly to the drowsy child. He carried a bundle of stripped bark and went straight to the kitchen to prepare the medicinal tea, working with practiced efficiency. Daisy was struck by how naturally he took charge in a crisis, calm and capable without being overbearing. "It's bitter," he warned as he brought a cup of the steaming liquid to the bedside, "but it will help bring down the fever." Together, they coaxed the reluctant child to drink the tea, with Daisy promising a special treat in class when Mary was well again. By midnight, the fever had broken, and the little girl had fallen into a natural, healing sleep. Mrs. Collins, who had rejoined them hours earlier, wept with relief. "I don't know how to thank you both," she said. "If you hadn't come, anyone would have done the same," Daisy assured her, though they all knew that wasn't entirely true. Not everyone would have spent half the night caring for a laundress's child. As they finally left the Collins home in the early hours of the morning, Kit took Daisy's hand in his, squeezing it gently. "You're a remarkable woman, Daisy Ellsworth." She smiled up at him, tired but content. "We make a good team, I think." "Yes," he agreed, his voice low and certain. "We do." The next day, despite her lack of sleep, Daisy taught her classes as usual. Word of her night at the Collins spread through town quickly, and several parents stopped by the schoolhouse with small tokens of appreciation: a jar of preserves, a bouquet of wildflowers, a loaf of freshly baked bread. The community's gratitude touched her deeply, reinforcing her sense of belonging in Nogales. That evening, as she was preparing to leave the schoolhouse, she was surprised to find James Tanner waiting outside rather than Kit. "James," she greeted him with a smile. "This is unexpected." "Is everything all right at the ranch?" "Everything's fine," he assured her. "Kit asked me to come fetch you. Said to tell you he has something important to show you if you're not too tired from your night of nursing." Intrigued, Daisy gathered her things and allowed James to help her into his wagon. As they rode out of town, he made pleasant conversation, asking about her classes and commenting on the weather, but Daisy sensed an undercurrent of excitement in his manner. When they reached the Double T, Laura met them in the yard, her eyes sparkling with suppressed delight. "He's waiting for you by the oak," she told Daisy, squeezing her hand meaningfully. Heart suddenly fluttering with anticipation, Daisy made her way up the gentle slope behind the house. The oak tree stood silhouetted against the evening sky, and beneath it waited Kit, looking unusually nervous. As she approached, she realized he'd set up a small table and 2 chairs under the tree. A simple bouquet of wildflowers graced the center of the table, and 2 place settings were arranged neatly. "What's all this?" Daisy asked, pleasure warming her voice. Kit took both her hands in his expression more open and vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "I had this all planned before Mary Collins got sick," he explained. "Was going to bring you out here yesterday evening, but—" He smiled slightly. "Watching you care for that child, seeing your kindness and strength, it only made me more certain of what I wanted to ask you." Daisy's breath caught as Kit went down on one knee before her, still holding her hands in his. Daisy Ellsworth, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I've lived enough to recognize what matters when I find it. His eyes held her steadily. I love you. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you standing in that creek, soaking wet and more worried about your locket than yourself. I want to build a life with you here, at the Double T, if you'll have me. Tears of joy filled Daisy's eyes as Kit released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a simple gold ring with a small, perfect pearl. Will you marry me, Daisy? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Yes, she whispered, then more firmly. Yes, Kit Tanner, I will marry you. His face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to pull her into his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the promise of the future they would build together. When they finally parted, Daisy touched her locket, then the new ring on her finger. From lost to love, she murmured. Who would have thought a creek could change everything? I'll be grateful to that creek for the rest of my days, Kit said, smiling down at her. And to the broken chain that brought you into my life. From the ranch house came the sound of cheering. Looking down the slope, they saw James, Laura, Tommy, and even little Abigail on the porch, clapping and calling their congratulations. I think our family approves, Kit laughed, taking Daisy's hand. Our family, she thought, her heart full. Yes, that sounded exactly right. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in late July at the small church in Nogales. Despite the summer heat, it seemed the entire town turned out for the occasion. Mary Collins, fully recovered from her illness, proudly served as flower girl, while Tommy Tanner stood beside his uncle as best man, chest puffed out with importance. Daisy wore a simple white dress that Laura had helped her make, with her mother's locket the catalyst for everything that had followed gleaming at her throat. Kit, standing tall at the altar in a new suit that made him look simultaneously uncomfortable and handsome, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle on James Tanner's arm. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with vows they had written themselves. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kit's kiss was reverent and tender, promising a lifetime of devotion. The celebration afterwards spilled out of the church and into the yard, with tables of food prepared by the women of the town and music provided by local musicians. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Mrs. Tanner, Kit murmured as they shared a quiet moment amid the celebration. How does it sound? Like home, Daisy replied, leaning into his embrace. Like exactly where I'm meant to be. Later that night, after they had retired to the small cabin Kit had built for them on the Double T property close enough to the main house for family meals, but private enough for newlyweds, Daisy stood by the window, looking out at the star-filled Arizona sky. Kit came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her shoulder. Happy, love, completely, she assured him, turning in his arms to face him. I came west looking for a new beginning, but I never imagined finding you. We found each other, he corrected gently, touching the locket at her throat. With a little help from this. Daisy smiled, covering his hand with hers where it rested on the silver pendant. My parents would have loved you, she said softly. Not just for fishing this out of the creek, but for the man you are. I hope so, Kit replied. I plan to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve their daughter. In the soft darkness of their new home, they sealed that promise with a kiss that spoke of all the days to come, of challenges faced together, of joys shared, of a love that had begun with a lost locket and would endure far beyond the finding of it. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Tanner family. Daisy continued teaching at the Nogales school until the birth of their first child, a son they named William after Kit's father, in the summer of 1879. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Daisy's mother. The Double T Ranch prospered under the brothers' management, with Kit handling most of the practical running of the ranch while James increasingly focused on the business aspects. Daisy brought her own contributions, starting a small library in one corner of their expanded cabin, and eventually teaching not only their own children but those of the ranch hands as well. In 1884, when William was 5 and Elizabeth 3, Daisy gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named Michael and Sarah. The Double T was truly flourishing then, with 2 generations of tanners calling it home and enough prosperity to weather the occasional difficult seasons that came with ranching life. Through it all, the silver locket remained a treasured symbol of how their life together had begun. Daisy wore it on special occasions, anniversaries, birthdays, holidays when the extended family gathered at the ranch. As the children grew old enough to understand, the story of the lost locket and Kit's day-long search became a family favorite, requested often at bedtime. "Tell us again how Papa found your locket, Mama." 8-year-old Elizabeth would beg, her eyes so like Kit's wide with anticipation, and Daisy would smile at her husband across the room, both of them knowing that the story was really about so much more than a piece of silver recovered from a creek. It was about persistence, about caring enough to search until you found what mattered. It was about the beginning of their love story, a love that had only deepened with each passing year. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Kit presented Daisy with a special gift, a handcrafted wooden box lined with velvet, specially made to hold her locket when she wasn't wearing it. "So it never gets lost again," he explained as she admired the beautiful craftsmanship. Daisy traced her fingers over the box, then reached up to touch the locket at her throat. "Even if it did," she said softly, "I know you'd find it for me." "Every time," Kit promised, taking her hand in his. "Though I think we've both found something far more precious than silver since then." Looking around at their home filled with children's laughter, at the life they'd built together on the land they both loved, Daisy couldn't help but agree. The locket had been the beginning, but what followed, their enduring love, their family, their shared purpose, was the true treasure. And it had all begun with a broken chain, a rushing creek, and a cowboy who refused to give up until he found what had been lost.